Ladies and gentlemen, 15 tips and tricks that will immediately help you master your sleigh in Darktide. Thank you for joining me for the second video in my 5-part Darktide tips and tricks series. Now that you have a good understanding of the different combat phases you'll encounter in each of Darktide's missions and what best to do during each one, today I'm going to expand on overall best practices, helpful mechanics, and some very important do's and don'ts that'll immediately improve your gameplay. If you haven't seen my first video in the series where I cover these combat phases, be sure to go back and watch that as well. Thank you again for joining me. I'm Germ, and I'm very excited to share with you everything I can to help you improve. I'm going to break up the 15 tips and tricks into 3 categories: combat, support, and objectives. So let's get right into it, starting with combat tip number 1, weak spots for the win. For almost every melee weapon in the game, it's so important to focus your aim on the enemy weak points. And in most cases, that is going to be their head. Now, there are enemies with different armor types where you will benefit from hitting them in different locations, but for your typical horde filled with groaners and poxwalkers, you'll want to keep your attacks right at dome level. It can be very easy to get into the zone dodge dancing and staggering enemies while aiming at their shoulders or torsos, but you do way less damage when doing so. Not only does it reduce damage output and increase your time to kill, but it can also extend a horde or boss fight just long enough that it becomes detrimental to the team. So, make it a habit to always keep your crosshair at head level when fighting, and you'll be dominating hordes, chopping off more heads, and laying waste to enemies faster than ever before. Combat tip number 2, master your combat dance. Your combat dance is a fighting style that combines all the combat mechanics into a synchronous flow of offensive and defensive movements. It starts by continuously dodging, making it hard for enemies to lock on and hit you, combined with a mix of blocking, attacking, and every now and then stamina bearing, sneaking in a push or parry attack to stagger enemies in the process. The point is to constantly move, block, and stagger enemies to avoid damage while getting in as many hits as possible. Rinse and repeat over and over in a fight, and you've got your combat dance. The trick here is that every weapon plays different, and every class attachment allows you to min-max your character in different ways, which end up being more favorable to different fighting styles. So, find the weapons you enjoy and characters you like and start with those. Then, mod your weapons and curios with the perks that boost your playstyle, and in-game, start to build a dodge dance pattern that you find most effective by trying it in combat. Horde control, responding to specials, and fighting elites and bosses will become way easier once you can really get into the groove of dancing around them while slaying at the same time. So, master your combat dance. Combat tip number 3, know when to kite. Kiting is a more advanced skill, particularly in Tide games, since so many mechanics, enemy interactions, and situations are built around you benefiting from it by doing it well. Many other games in the genre have some form of it, but in Darktide, it's definitely something you should know and a skill you should develop. I've dedicated an entire video to it in this series, part 4, which you'll get to soon, where I cover in detail how it works and how you can master it. For now, however, I want to at least mention some of the basics and best practices so you at least know when to do it or can quickly identify when a teammate is doing it. In short, kiting is the act of using enemy aggro to manipulate enemies on the battlefield to your advantage. So, if an enemy is attacking you, kiting it means dragging them around the map by dodging and moving away from them in such a way that allows you to stay alive and take as little damage as possible while continuing to fight back when it's safe. Let's say, for instance, you're overwhelmed by 2 ragers who are thrashing away in your face. In this situation, you want to block and dodge into a position where your teammates can help you. There are ways you can deal with them on your own, but you'll likely take a ton of damage or even go down in the process. They attack so fast and do so much damage that it's always better to ping them, block and dodge backwards to kite them into a position where your team can help. Other situations you want to kite in are during boss fights if the boss is targeting you, when you're overwhelmed from a high density of enemy attacks, when you need to quickly reposition, say if a horde or a special just spawned and you're not with your team. There's also more dire situations like when your entire team is down and you're trying to clutch. Remember, you are an extension of your team as much as they are an extension of you. If you get overwhelmed, ping the enemies, block and push if possible, and dodge back to your team or teammate so they can help. And if you see a teammate kiting, help them out if you're not already engaged. Splitting the aggro and grouping up is only going to help you both survive and be in a better position to deal with what comes next. Combat tip number 4. Use your environment. This is another topic I'll be covering in more detail in my advanced positioning video, which is the 5th and final video in my tips and tricks series. However, it's critical you at least know some of the basics here as well. In general, you want to treat the level as a weapon that you use to your advantage. Hugging the walls and using objects in the world to avoid getting surrounded and attacked from all angles is very important. Using cover, especially when there's a ton of gunners, and always utilizing choke points to control hordes to thin out groups of enemies. There's also barrels placed throughout the levels that you can use to stagger and do damage to enemies. Similarly, there's doors you can close that will slow enemies down, even if it's only for a short moment, but it will create some space for you to get a few kills in and reposition. You also want to make sure you use elevation changes, such as drop downs and ladders, staircases, and objects in the world which will force enemies into climbing, jumping, and vaulting animations which slow them down. And lastly, you want to use rotations for kiting, and when you combine that with everything else I just talked about, you can use the entire level to your advantage. The environments in Darktide are designed to help you if you use them properly. Think of them as a weapon that's part of your arsenal. Pick where you want to hold out, where you want to fight, and where you kite so that you are the one in control. Combat tip number 5, the safety bubble. This tip is one of the simplest suggestions I can give that'll help you immediately reduce how much damage you take in game and in turn reduce how much you go down and how often you die. Darktide is designed to be much more long range than previous Tide games. However, that means you have to be way more conscious about when you put away your gun and pull out your melee weapon to block and fight up close. I often see players taking unnecessary damage simply because they get hyper-focused on killing an enemy that's far away when there's enemies nearby that need to be addressed first. Get into the habit of using your weapon quick swap button so you can quickly pull out your melee weapon, and do this constantly to check on nearby enemies. Think of having a safety bubble around you that's 3 yards in diameter, which is the typical distance an enemy can hit you with a sliding attack. If you're using a long-range weapon and an enemy comes within that bubble, get ready to swap out and use your melee. Keep your head on a swivel, use your quick swap key constantly, and if an enemy comes within your safety bubble, pull out your melee weapon and deal with them first. That's it for combat tips. Let's move on to the 5 best support tips I can share, starting with support tip number 1, ping them if you see them. This one is easy and so important, guys. If you see an elite, a special enemy, a dormant demon host, or if a boss spawns, or if you just need some help with a tough enemy that's attacking you, ping that shit. Always ping it so that everyone on your team has the same information you have so you all can make the best decisions possible. Don't wait until an enemy or a group of enemies are in your face either. Ping them from a distance so your team can organize around killing them based on priority. Lastly, it's quite often you or a teammate will have eyes on something other people don't, and calling high damage dealing enemies out so they can get targeted first will make getting through the levels and out of tough situations much smoother. So, ping them if you see them. Support tip number 2, keep it tight. Not only does staying grouped up maximize damage output, defense capability, and make support resources readily available to the whole team right when they're needed, but there's a proximity-based toughness boost in the game called coherency that stacks up to 4 times depending on how many teammates you're close to. It's one of the most underrated mechanics in the game that I see players not utilizing, but drastically increases your team's staying power by regenerating your toughness faster. Not only does it boost the regen of your speed, but each character has a level 15 feat that grants some killer perks to you or even your teammates if they proc while in coherency range. The veteran, for instance, has a feat called Demolition Team that has a 5% chance to grant you and your teammates a grenade after killing an enemy. The Ogryn has a great one as well, called Towering Presence, that grants players a 50% radius increase in coherency. So keep it tight, guys. Check out the level 15 feats on all your characters and watch your coherency stacks in game and get familiar with how close you need to be to your teammates to reap the benefits of this amazing perk. Support tip number 3, use resources wisely. First up, let's talk about grenades, and the worst thing I see players do that could easily save a team from getting wiped, or significantly reduce the damage a team takes from a tough horde, or even save a teammate from dying, is to not throw them. The levels will constantly replenish grenades as you push forward, as long as you're checking crates and looking around a little. So if you have grenades, use them to help you in the fight. You can also get some pretty clutch team saves if someone gets nabbed by a dog across the map, or is potentially stuck at the top of a drop down, or if you need to stagger a sniper. So if you got them, use them, guys, and of course, use them wisely. Don't spam them, but don't hold on to them and die because of it. Here's a quick extra pointer here as well. If you have 1 or more preachers on the team, be sure to replenish their grenades first out of all the classes. The preacher definitely has the most effective grenade, which stuns every enemy in a large radius for several seconds. My second resource tip is to use and share ammo wisely. Keep an eye on your teammates' ammo pool down on the bottom left of your HUD. Teammates with yellow or red ammo icons should always get first dibs, and if you need ammo, be sure to use your comms wheel and let your team know so that they can ping some for you if they see it. Speaking of pinging it, be sure to do this everywhere you go so your entire team knows where there's extra ammo. My last resource tip is to share med stations correctly, guys. They don't always have 4 heals for the entire team, so it's always better to let those with the least amount of health heal first. Especially if someone has corruption, which is the purple bar that dictates the amount of permanent health loss a player will have until they heal up at an apothecary station. So coordinate with your team and always check before getting that health boost. Those with the highest corruption and the lowest health should always heal up first. Support tip number 4, know when to res. When a teammate goes down, there's a few soft rules I like to follow that'll help you decide when and how to go for a pickup, and at times, whether going for the res is even worth it. The first rule is if a teammate goes down and you're not overwhelmed, you should immediately start making moves for a pickup. Just make sure you have the stamina to tank a couple hits, or your team nearby to help, or a grenade that can stagger enemies and create some space for you to get the res. Remember, the minute someone goes down, or if you split from your team or take too long for the pickup, the game is gonna spawn specials and they'll likely be disablers, which you'll want your teammate up for in case you go down as well. The second rule to follow is, if you think it's too dangerous to go for the pickup, kill stuff first, especially if there's a bunch of gunners nearby. Remember, in-capped teammates get a full temporary health bar when they go down before they're dead, and they don't take more health corruption the longer they're down. So let them lie and kill what you need to kill first before you go for the res. The last rule I like to follow when a teammate is downed, and could be the most important out of all three, is don't throw the game or sacrifice teammates that are alive to attempt a pickup. This applies firstly to teammates that go down and are split from the team. Do not split up further just for a pickup if your downed teammate is far away, especially if you're in the middle of a fight. Unless the entire team is coordinating and gonna move together to attempt the save, stay grouped up. The priority here is to stick with your team, stay alive, and take as little damage as possible. Remember, you're being punished for splitting up here, so don't make it worse on yourself. I also want to point out here that dead teammates respawn quickly. When someone's dead, there'll be a timer on your HUD next to their name showing when mates will respawn, which is only 20 seconds. Spawn points are typically close by as well, so don't risk the mission or other teammates for a pickup, especially if the downed player is far away and, like I said, just got punished for being alone. With all that said, guys, no one likes to go down and sit there while the team continues to fight. But when you do go down, be patient as your team organizes around a potential pickup. And if your teammates go down, always consider the res. Just be smart about it so you don't do more damage than good. Support tip number 5, picking up the right teammate first. This one is a very specific tip that applies to very specific circumstances, but I want to mention it because I see teammates doing the wrong thing quite often, and I've even made this mistake myself before and cost my team the game. If there's only one teammate alive who's trying to clutch, or even only 2 of you alive, it's so important to know which of your captured teammates to pick up first. Teammates are always going to spawn ahead of you unless you're at the end of a mission, and usually will have a mix of enemies surrounding them that you'll aggro as you get close. If you're trying to clutch or are already in a tough spot, be sure to always pick up your tank characters first. Priority number 1 should always be the Ogryn if you have one on your team. Not only does he get rezzed with his ult, where he can immediately stun and stagger enemies around you, but he can also pick everyone else up that's downed without getting interrupted if enemies are attacking him. Like I mentioned, I've made this mistake myself, and I've seen other people do it where they've worked so hard to try and clutch alone with a horde behind them, elites to follow, and specials on their ass, and when they finally catch up to their downed teammates and go to pick them up, they pick up the Psyker or the Veteran first, which don't have great crowd control and can't tank any damage to get a pickup. So if you have an Ogryn on your team, make sure to pick him up first. The second priority pickup has got to be your other tank character, the Preacher. Unfortunately, he won't get rezzed with any of his amazing grenades that he could throw, but he's your next best bet to help with crowd control so the rest of the team can get picked up. And then it's basically a toss-up between the Veteran and the Psyker. Basically, you want to pick up the players with the most health and stamina and with the best ability to control a crowd and help with picking up other teammates. So do it in that order: Ogryn, Preacher, and then Veteran or Psyker. Let's move on to the final tips and tricks category, objectives. Objective tip number 1, coordinate and prioritize. No matter what the objective you're doing in the game, just be sure to pay attention and work with your team, guys. Start when everyone is ready. Know where you're going to be holding out by following the group, or take the lead and use your comms wheel to ping a location that you would like to hold out in. Then just stay focused during the objective and work together. Hordes are endless in a lot of these holdout spots, so coordinating together is going to make the events way easier. I always recommend having a mic and talking to your teammates, even if they're not talking back, guys. And again, if no one is really coordinating, use your comms wheel and ping areas where you want to go and hold out next. It only takes one person on the team to rally and organize around a plan, so communicate, coordinate, and prioritize things together, and the objectives are going to go way smoother. Objective tip number 2, always cover your teammates. Whether it's you or your teammate doing the objective, make sure to stick together and cover them. Allowing a team member to constantly get interrupted while scanning or carrying an item can cause the team to take a ton of damage and prolong the event, which means more hordes and more specials that you'll have to deal with. And if the event has started and no one is working the objective, do it yourself and ask somebody for help or ping the objective so they know you're heading that way. Bonus tip here as well, if you have a veteran who's running Camo Expert, coordinate so they handle the Auspics objectives, since they can easily get ignored by enemies if they're standing still. Objective tip number 3, slide to slay. Sliding is a great way to get objectives done no matter what character you're playing, since it doesn't use stamina. For all characters except the Ogryn, a speed penalty gets applied if you're carrying something, but sliding is unaffected by this penalty, so you can make way more ground way faster by sliding to your delivery point if you're carrying an objective item. Pair that with the Ogryn, who doesn't have a speed penalty for carrying something and who has a ton of stamina, and he can easily get objectives done quickly where items need to get carried. My only caution here is to be careful when sliding. It doesn't make you faster than enemies chasing you, so stick with your team and slide when it's appropriate. Objective tip number 4, remember the basics. During objectives, the game is going to constantly throw everything at you it can, which can easily break your team up and make it feel very chaotic. When you feel those moments getting tense, always go back to the basics, guys. Stick together, use your environment to create some space, or manipulate the incoming onslaught so that you have the advantage, and play it smart. Remember, you're often one or more teammates down in these situations, since at least one of you will need to handle the objective, so some of you will absolutely need to pick up the slack here. Objective tip number 5, know your team's spawn points. If one or more of your teammates are down and you're at an objective point or an assassination fight, you always need to know where they're gonna spawn. Watch the spawn timer on your HUD and start making a rotation to them as it's safe to do so. By continuously kiting and rotating to the spot where I know they're gonna spawn can sometimes save the mission. So know the spawn points, guys, and continuously kite and rotate so you can get there for a clutch pickup if you need to. All right, we have reached the end here, guys, but I have one final bonus tip I want to share with you today, and that bonus tip is don't die. There are gonna be missions and a ton of moments where you feel the overwhelming pressure of the game crashing down on you, and as impossible as it might feel when you're already thinking to yourself, that's it, I'm going down, or you feel like calling GG, don't give up. Meet the moment by playing your best. Stick to the basics, work with your team, and make decisions quickly, and I promise you'll get out of a ton of tough situations that feel impossible. And you'll come out on the other side better because of it and have way more fulfilling games. So, don't give up, guys, no matter what. Stay in the fight until it's actually over, and don't die. Guys, thanks for joining me today for my general tips and tricks to help you dominate in Darktide. Be sure to watch part 3 of my 5-part series next, where I'll be talking about how to be the best teammate possible. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like below, hit that subscribe and bell button if you're new to the channel and a fan of Darktide, and I will see you on the next Skirm's Garage. Peace.